It's the Moby-Dick read-along dream, presented by Robinson.
Where's the plot? Where's the plot?
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Moby-Dick read-along, part 6. Part 6 of our nautical adventure through this mysterious, strange, long book, which is my favorite book of all time, as you know, if you've been following along. And today, our chapters are going to be, I think, a good sampling of what makes this book peculiar, what makes it wonderful, what makes people put it down, what makes people hate Moby-Dick, what makes people love Moby-Dick. Because today, we leave the plot. We leave the plot kind of behind. It's always there in the background. Ahab's monomaniacal quest to kill the white whale. It's always this kind of engine driving everything along, this energy. Until Ishmael starts talking about pictures of whales, hooray! Which I actually really like and enjoy. But yeah, the chapters that we're going to read today are these. 51, the spirit spout. Then, the Pequod meets the albatross. The Gam. The town hose story, which is one of my favorite chapters in all of Moby-Dick. So good. Monstrous pictures of whales. Less erroneous pictures of whales in paint and teeth, etc. Brit, squid, and the line. So we're getting lots of like words that are just ocean things, whaling terminology, the line. But each of these chapters has like such an amazing gem ending of wisdom, not even wisdom, but just an insight, some sort of connection that I love that makes this book so beautiful and enjoyable for me. So let's jump right in to chapter 51, The Spirit Spout, in this beautiful Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition. It's so great. I love the feeling of this little thing. It's so bricky. It's wonderful. Okay, I want to start by reading you the description of the evening that Ishmael experiences when the spirit spout is first described by Fadala. He first describes how days, weeks passed under easy sail, the ivory Pequod slowly creeping along the four several cruising grounds. So Ishmael and Melville, I guess we should say, establishes a really great temporal sense that spices the whole thing. I get this feeling when I'm reading Moby-Dick at this point of long, languid days passing, of reflection. And not only do we get these little almost bookend sentences describing how time is passing, but even the whaling chapter information, bits that fill in those bookends feel imbued with this kind of lazy rocking. You're on the masthead, and Ishmael's thinking about the line or the monkey rope or pictures of whales. Those digressions, for me, don't ever fully leave the Pequod. They feel like a reflection that's had upon the Pequod. I don't feel like I'm reading this amazing book and then bang, whiplash, I'm suddenly reading about like something I don't care about. I never really feel that reading Moby-Dick, and I think some people do. I think the reason I don't feel that way is because Melville is so tasteful in adding all of these kind of flavorful, like I said, temporal information sentences. And then he describes this evening. It was while gliding through these latter waters that one serene and moonlit night, when all the waves rolled by like scrolls of silver, and by their soft suffusing seethings made what seemed silvery silence, not a solitude. On such a silent night, a silvery jet was seen far in advance of the white bubbles at the bow. Lit up by the moon, it looked celestial, seemed some plump and glittering god uprising from the sea. Wow. I mean, that's just like poetry to me. That's why people call this book a prose poem. If you didn't speak English and you heard me say this and you were just, spoke, Czech or something, you would be like, oh, why is he saying so many S's? You would hear that Melville's kind of feeling is that the S sound is capturing some part of the waves, some part of the moonlit feeling, the soft suffusing seethings, the scrolls of silver, the celestial, everything about it is just so beautiful and so evocative. I'm seeing waves rolling by with like moonlight kind of doing that glimmering side thing that painters can sometimes capture. It's so cool. And Fadala sees a jet off in the distance. "There she blows," he cries. And of course, a lot of the sailors end up thinking, "Oh, could this be Moby-Dick? Could it be Moby-Dick?" But it disappears. And no one really lowers for whales at night, apparently, which makes sense. I mean, it's hard enough in the daytime. And while people are kind of scuttling around on the deck trying to see, what is this jet? We get this wonderful description of the wind blowing through the sails and beneath Ishmael's feet, and the spectral feeling that he gets in this moment. The strange, upheaving, lifting tendency of the taffrail breeze filling the hollows of so many sails made the buoyant, hovering deck to feel like air beneath the feet. What a great feeling. Have you ever been on a plane or out driving in the Midwest and you get out of your car and the wind is just moving through you and you feel like you're not even part of gravity, you're just kind of sailing along with the wind? It's amazing. While she still rushed along, as if two antagonistic influences were struggling in her, one to mount direct to heaven, the other to drive yawingly to some horizontal goal. Such a cool description. The wind is moving the sails up, the Pequod's going to heaven, but there's this other force that's kind of just making the Pequod yaw aimlessly. Yaw is a word that I learned reading Treasure Island, funny enough. It basically means when a ship is like it's not like, its sails aren't set, I think. It's not anchored. It's just kind of floating on the water like sideways and moving along with tides. That's yawing. It's kind of has this connotation to me of meaning of purposelessness. So there we go. We got one thing mounting to heaven, one thing of purposelessness. That's a great description. And then, oh my God, what a great way to connect it. She does here. "And had you watched Ahab's face that night, you would have thought that in him also two different things were warring." So, we have these two forces going to heaven and going meaninglessly. And, of course, Melville connects this. Oh, something like this is happening in Ahab. "While his one live egg made lively echoes along the deck, every stroke of his dead limb sounded like a coffin tap. On life and death this old man walked." Wow, so cool. I mean, you can hear it. You can hear the lively echoes and taps of his boot, and then of the ivory legs. So cool. And then the spout disappears. We don't see it, but then it comes back, and then disappears. And it comes back, and the sailors become superstitious and think, "Is this Moby-Dick spouting? Like tantalizing us, moving us forward, drawing us on to some heathenish, sharkish waters so that it'll turn upon us and kill us?" Of course, that's what the sailors are going to say. But eventually, they're sailing all these smooth waters, I think in the Atlantic, moving south towards Africa, and then they have to round the Cape of Good Hope. For a landlubber like me, I have to look up all of these things. I've learned this previously from reading Moby-Dick and from reading other books like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But essentially, if this is Africa, the waters around the tip of Africa are really famously bad. There's just storms there happening all the time. And it's kind of rocky and so on. And a lot of ships go down over there. Famously, the HMS Beagle almost, lost it there. It had to find refuge in some sort of cove, and it barely made it. And that barge, that ship was carrying Charles Darwin on it. So it would have been a pretty big deal if it had gone down. So they round the Cape Hope, and things start to kind of become even more nightmarish. This whole chapter feels like it's drenched in this black cloak of night to me. "Close to our bows, strange forms in the water darted hither and thither before us, while thick on our rear flew the inscrutable sea ravens." I love that. These dark forms are darting. They're probably dolphins, but around the Cape of Good Hope, they assume this kind of demon-like or spirit-like, these haunting kind of things in the water. They don't really feel like cheerful, companions anymore. "And every morning, perched on our stays, rows of these birds were seen, and in spite of our hootings, for a long time obstinately clung to the hemp, as though they deemed our ship some drifting, uninhabited craft, a thing appointed to desolation, and therefore fit roosting place for their homeless selves. And heaved and still unrestingly heaved the black sea, as if its vast tides were a conscience, and the great mundane soul were in anguish and remorse, for the long sin and suffering it had bred. What an idea that the ocean is tormented from killing all these sailors around the Cape of Good Hope, and that causes the heaving and the tumultuousness that ends up killing more sailors. It's such a strange psychological thing to assign to the ocean around the Cape of Good Hope. And then, of course, the image of these birds, these ravens, flocking to the Pequod as if it were already desolate and abandoned, like everyone on it were already dead. That's a pretty haunting image. Things are getting haunting down in Moby-Dick right now. This is crazy. And then Ishmael comes in with some kind of like fun, Cape of Good Hope, they call you. Rather, Cape Tormentoso, as called of yore. And essentially Ahab all the while is standing firmly, clutching a shroud, facing ahead while the sea breeze, the freaking frigid sea breeze blows on him, icicles in the beard, dripping icicles out the nostrils type of thing. And he's just looking stolid and stoic straight ahead the whole time that Starbuck becomes pretty freaking weirded out by this. And in one of the few instances in which Ahab is found in his cabin sleeping, it's a horrific scene where Ahab is like, I don't know if he's sleeping with his eyes open. I'll read it so we can see. Never could Starbuck forget the old man's aspect. When one night going down into the cabin to mark how the barometer stood, he saw him, Ahab, with closed eyes, sitting straight in his floor-screwed chair. The rain and half-meted sleet of the storm from which he had some time before emerged, still slowly dripping from the unremoved hat and coat. On the table beside him lay unrolled one of those charts of tides and currents which have previously been spoken of. His lantern swung from his tightly clenched hand. Though the body was erect, the head was thrown back so that the closed eyes were pointing towards the needle of the telltale that swung from a beam in the ceiling. Basically, there's this compass that's in the cabin's deck in the cabin that Ahab's like almost looking at while he sleeps. Terrible old man, thought Starbuck with a shudder, sleeping in this gale. Still thou steadfastly eyest thou purpose. And the idea of this, Ahab is asleep and he's still clutching a lamp. That's insane. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard the story about Benjamin Franklin used to really try to figure out what his dreams were right as he was falling asleep. So he would sit in a chair and hold marbles. And then when he would fall asleep, they would relax and fall, and then he'd write down. When you fall asleep, you relax, obviously. The idea that Ahab is sleeping, clenched with the thing, especially with the previous image we got in Moby-Dick, that he sleeps, and when he wakes up, his nails are bloody with how much he's clenching. What an image. So good. What a great moody chapter. This is Ishmael. This is Melville. I'm always going to be doing that. This is Ishmael/Melville moving us into darker waters, darker places. We've had a lot of fun buddy, Ishmael, Queequeg banter. We're going to get more of that too, but the tide is changing. Things are shifting into this different direction. But we're about to get a nice little respite from darkness and some more interesting plot with chapter 52 and moving onwards towards the town host story. So I'll see you shortly. Okay, and now we're on chapter 52, the albatross. And we start with this kind of interesting crossing. These whale ships, it might seem like if you're just going around the ocean, what are the frickin' odds that you're ever going to run into another ship? But they're on regular cruising grounds, so meetings are actually frequent enough to expect them, and even frequent enough to have letters on your ship that are addressed to other people. So, let's say that you're the Pequod and you're going to leave Nantucket, and there's, probably 30 to 50 different families who have husbands or sons that are out there whaling. And they want this newest, latest expedition to have a chance of getting a letter over to their loved one. They'll just kind of give them copies of letters or new letters, and then the Pequod will go out with a bunch of letters and have them for everyone else out there. So it's basically part of the culture. And they spot this ship called the Goooo, or the albatross is kind of, I guess, what we would say. There's a great passage where Ishmael describes how he's in a masthead. He's in one of the three big, poles with the sails, and the other men on there look very old, and they're wearing bear skins or something, and they're just silently looking at each other as the ships come across, and they don't speak a word to one another, while below on the deck people are talking. It's a very interesting feeling. if you've ever been kind of part of a deputation of any kind, but you really aren't the person talking to the other side, and you're just kind of looking at the other people, whether it's like two classes are meeting, or like, I don't know, if you were part of a Roman legion back in the day, I wonder what it would have felt like to look at the other army, to look at the other men. You know, there's that sort of feeling. And Ahab calls out to the albatross, "Ship ahoy! Have you seen the white whale?" And this will become kind of a refrain for Ahab. And then this happens. But as the strange captain of the albatross, leaning over the pallid bulwarks, was in the act of putting his trumpet to his mouth, kind of a little megaphone cone, it somehow fell from his hand into the sea, and the wind now rising amain, he in vain strove to make himself heard without it. So they don't get any information from this first meeting. They don't get to hear anything. The one thing that they would have heard it from, the trumpet, fell into the ocean. So Ahab starts to call out to say, like, hey, well, you know, if you get any letters, tell them to address them to the Pacific Ocean. And this time, 3 years, he's kind of talking. And at the same time Ahab is kind of talking, the wakes of the ship cross. And there's all these kind of schools of fish following the wakes of the ship, and they all kind of collide in this moment, and they end up going towards the other ship. And this is a scene Ahab would have seen a lot of, many times. This is what, actually, Ishmael says this. Though in the course of his continual voyagings, Ahab must have before noticed a similar sight, yet to any monomaniac man, the veriest trifles capriciously carry meanings. And then we get this passage. This is so interesting. "Swim away from me, do ye?" murmured Ahab, gazing over into the water. There seemed but little in the words, but the tone conveyed more of the deep, helpless sadness than the insane old man had ever evinced. But turning to the steersman, who thus far had been holding the ship in the wind to diminish her headway, he cried out in his old line voice, "Up helm, keep her off round the world." That's such an interesting dimension to Ahab. We see these fish that are just doing what fish do, but they kind of leave the Pequod and go onto another ship. And this makes Ahab sad. This makes him feel lonely. You know, swim away from me, do you? He almost feels guilty, or maybe not guilty, but he knows he's perceiving this, of course, like these fish are abandoning him because they can tell that he's kind of going on this vengeful, crazy quest. But it nonetheless makes him sad. He doesn't scorn them leaving him. A lesser writer would have made Ahab just kind of this angry thing that wants to kill the white whale and have no other depth. But this is another dimension that I really respect. And then he says, of course, "Up helm, keep her off round the world." What a thing to say. Round the world. There is much in that sound to inspire proud feelings. But whereto does all that circumnavigation conduct? Only through numberless perils to the very point of whence we started, where those that we left behind secure were all the time before us. So Ishmael says, sounds all exciting to go, I'm going to sail around the world, but I'm not sailing to anything. I'm just going to end up right back where I started in Nantucket. And meantime, all the while I'm traveling, every day I could just die on this crazy quest that is not, you know, the whole purpose of it is also whaling itself, which is super dangerous. And he even brings this up, were this world an endless plain, and by sailing eastward we could forever reach in distances and discover sights more sweet and strange than any Cyclades or islands of King Solomon, then there were promise in the voyage. There's no promise in this voyage. I mean, I guess unless you just successfully kill Moby-Dick and then go back to Nantucket, that's an adventure, I guess, but it's not reaching a destination, if that makes sense. And this pretty much, you know, this is the chapter. The question I have is, you know, I wrote here kind of for myself, kind of for you. This first gam is a comical, ominous thing. What had the captain to say ere his trumpet blew its wetter tune? Warnings, portents, calls for aid? We don't know. We'll never know what this guy wanted to tell us. He could have said something that could have changed the plot entirely. And I think it's a nice little device of Melville to kind of add hints of meaning to something that we can't know what the meaning would have actually been. And our next chapter is called The Gam, a word that I just used. You may not know it. I think I described it in another video. I'm sure I have. Ishmael defines it for us. A gam is basically a meeting of whaling ships on the ocean. Ishmael calls it a social meeting of two or more whale ships, generally on a cruising ground, when, after exchanging hails, they exchange visits by boat's crews, the two captains remaining for the time on board of one ship and the two chief mates on the other. Makes sense. 2 captains on one, 2 chief mates on the other. You would assume that the captains would be exchanging more formal information about, whales, feeding grounds, storms, happenings, goings on, maybe a newspaper article, might be a year old. A whaling ship might have gone 4 years without hearing news of anything. The Civil War is about to be happening. I mean, Melville finished this in like the 1850s or something like that. So anyways, the people were still whaling, I'm assuming, during the Civil War, and they would not know how the war is going. So they really do want to exchange information. But this chapter has some great, funny moments on it, describing pretty much the culture of whalers. And he's kind of going on at first about, being able to communicate is obviously important. Nor would difference of country make any essential difference. That is, so long as both parties speak one language, as is the case with Americans and English. English being English people, not the language English. Though, to be sure, from the small number of English whalers, such meetings do not very often occur. And when they do occur, there is apt to be a sort of shyness between them. For your Englishman is rather reserved, and your Yankee, he does not fancy that sort of thing in anybody but himself. Besides, the English whalers sometimes affect a kind of metropolitan superiority over the American whalers, regarding the long, lean Nantucketer with his nondescript provincialisms as a sort of sea peasant. But where this superiority in the English whaleman does really consist, it would be hard to say, seeing that the Yankees in one day kill, collectively, more whales than all the English collectively in 10 years. But this is a harmless little foible in the English whale hunters, which the Nantucketer does not take much to heart, probably because he knows that he has a few foibles himself. Man, I'm a broken record, but how good-natured is this writing? It could be a good-natured dig at the English people and say, oh yeah, we Nantucketers, we Americans, we're the real whalers over here. But really, he's acknowledging kind of how strange everyone is in this whole bloody business. And then we get this sentence, whereas some merchant ships, he's basically saying merchants don't do this. Merchants are just heartless capitalist going one way to make money people. They don't want to exchange information. They just want to get their destination. They don't care about socializing. There's no brotherhood. Some merchant ships crossing each other's wake in the mid-Atlantic will oftentimes pass on without so much as a single word of recognition, mutually cutting each other on the high seas like a brace of dandies in Broadway. I love that. Mel was so good at, for us landlubbers, evoking this emotion, these feelings on the sea, these experiences on the ocean, by connecting them with events that we would actually experience in our own lives. I'm not, living in Broadway in the 19th century, so I don't really know what it's like for a brace of dandies to cross my path, but I can kind of see that feeling of like a flock of flamingos keeping their necks up, walking past me. We've all been to high school. We've all been around people who do that. That's a great way to kind of make us feel that these merchant ships are just these kind of petty, snobbish vessels. It's great. And then basically Ishmael goes on to describe how not only do these merchant ships not touch base with one another, not only do pirates not do that, or military vessels really do it in any meaningful way, they scorn the whalers for being so brotherly and friendly. Why it is that all merchant seamen, and also pirates and man-of-war men, and slave ship sailors, cherish such a scornful feeling towards whale ships, this is a question it would be hard to answer. Because in the case of pirates, say, I should like to know whether that profession of theirs has any peculiar glory about it. It sometimes ends in uncommon elevation, indeed, but only at the gallows. That's great, you get hung up on the gallows, higher uncommon elevation. And besides, when a man is elevated in that odd fashion, he has no proper foundation in his superior altitude. Superior altitude. What a great turn of phrase. Hence, I conclude that in boasting himself to be high lifted above a whaleman, in that assertion the pirate has no solid basis to stand on. Because his legs are dangling, because he's gotten hung. This joke maybe goes on a little too long. It's like 3 sentences, and it could be one. But no, it doesn't. It's great. I like that joke. And then he says, but what is a gam? You might wear out your index finger running up and down the columns of dictionaries. I have my dictionary right here, actually, which I've been using. I brought this big, heavy dictionary to Japan with me, and I'm using it, which is great. Dr. Johnson never attained to that erudition. Noah Webster's Ark does not hold it. Awesome writing. Dr. Johnson, famously, Samuel Johnson, subject of Boswell's Life of Johnson, famous, strange guy, one of the earliest people in history who I know of who had Tourette's syndrome, who compiled his own dictionary, a bit of an idiosyncratic thing. I leafed through it when I was at my library back in Alabama. Never attained to that erudition. I guess the word gam is not in Johnson's dictionary, and I'm sure Ishmael researched that. And Noah Webster's Ark does not hold it. That's hilarious. Calling Noah's Ark, just a great combination. Again, Melville's mind is so good at making connections. He then defines gam, which I've already done for you. I already kind of skipped ahead to that. I love this piece of information, and it's great because if you're a person in this world who, well, I'll put it this way. Having a strong vocabulary has its advantages and its weaknesses. Some of the most intelligent people I've ever known in my entire life are intelligent in a way that allows them to communicate with everyone. Their intelligence also isn't something that they lord over people. They want to connect with people. They want to be understood, and they want people to understand them, and then to learn from them, not just to demonstrate their own knowledge. So, in that regard, using big words can mostly just distance yourself from people. It might make yourself look smart, and if you're trying to look smart, then maybe it will, but that's also kind of an a-hole thing to do, just trying to look smart. And you don't get to connect with people, right? So that's this weakness of having a strong vocabulary, and you're trying to use all these big words. But on the other hand, language is so beautiful. Language is rich. Language is this wonderful thing that we can use to connect. And words have meaning. They have flavor. They're not just signposts of, learning virtue or whatever it is. They actually can make you express yourself more elegantly and clearly. And what's tough is that you have to become a person in a way who can grade your language, who knows who you're talking to. Maybe one of your friends is, not a reader and isn't going to be using words like, obviously, gam, but isn't going to be using words like recalcitrant, recondite, or whatever it is. But they have no problem with you using them. And, they're open to kind of like hearing a new word and learning it. And then maybe you have a friend who's in the similar boat, doesn't read, but whenever you use a big word, they kind of feel bad, or maybe they feel like you're trying to be superior, so just don't use it with them. Then you have the friends who do read, or who do love language and love learning, and you can use these words that they probably don't know, and they really want to learn them. And then you have friends who love reading, and they know the words too, and using these big, fun, silly words like gam, or even these other, loquacious, whatever word you want to use, it's not a signpost of we're both learned. You're just using it, and you're not even thinking about it. On BookTube, when I'm talking to you guys, I tend to just talk using whatever words come to my mind, and I don't feel self-conscious whether they're big or small or whatever, which is really nice about this platform and about chatting with y'all. Plus, y'all read, and I think y'all are probably curious people, so if I use a word that you don't know, it's great. And I'm probably using a lot of these words incorrectly, because I'm learning too. We're all just learning. Anyways, gam. Moby-Dick just teaches me so many words, and I think it'd be so fun to start using nautical language in daily life. I was reading in the introduction of a Penguin Classics book of sea stories back at the Aichi Prefectural Library about how they would describe the appendix in a person in a sailor's medical book as being, south-southwest, which is like such a cool way to describe the world. Someone commented on one of the Moby-Dick read-along videos that I made with Steve, great gam guys. I can't remember who that was. I wonder if it was J. Scott Phillips, but it may have been someone else. Thank you, whoever that was. If it was you, J. Scott Phillips, you're awesome. If it was not you, you're awesome. Anyways, I love the vocabulary that Mel is getting us. I love that he lists it as an actual dictionary entry here. That's funny to me and useful. And then, now that I'm done talking about language and vocabulary usage, we get this description of how these captains have to basically go across rocky waters, rocky waves, to the other boat, but they have no place to sit. And because the whole eyes of the visible world are watching them, as Ishmael puts it, they don't want to lean on something or kind of, I don't know why these captains feel so insecure about this. They don't want to hold a shroud or hold one of the sail posts. They want to stand nobly like George Washington, crossing the Delaware. But Ahab's, of course, got a wooden leg, so that's hard, and it basically ends with this kind of joke. Nevertheless, there have occurred instances, well authenticated ones too, where the captain has been known for an uncommonly critical moment or two, in a sudden squall, say, to seize hold of the nearest oarsman's hair and hold on there like grim death. Great image of, I'm not going to grab the shroud. I'm just going to hold on to one of my poor oarsman's hair. That's wonderful. That's a gam. There's the gam. And we are going to experience many more gams. The gams of Moby-Dick punctuate it and give structure during this kind of, well, really during the rest of the book. The first third of the book has the structure of embarking on the adventure, learning a little about the kind of basics of whaling, right? And then for the rest of it, we're just on the open ocean. We're headed towards what we know is going to be the end of the book of an encounter with Moby-Dick, however it ends. We don't know how it's going to end, but until then, we have to just kind of pass the time. The way that we pass the time is with ponderings, musings, stories, gams, and then some things that happen on deck. Probably fewer things happen on deck than the typical 21st century reader wants. Probably the 21st century reader wants there to just be like a lot of on-deck, below-deck politics happening, some sort of Downton Abbey, whatever. That's probably what people assume Moby-Dick is going to be about a lot. That it's like this adventure, but these characters are clashing and, whatever. It really doesn't have that much of that. But when we do get it, it's freaking amazing and it's perfect. And yeah, so we're going to move on to the next chapter, chapter 54, The Town Hose Story. Okay, and now we're on chapter 54, The Town Hose Story. Let's jump in. One of my favorite beginnings of this chapter in the second paragraph, the first sentence, it has this little turn of phrase that's like a use of English grammar that I'm not familiar with, but it makes sense to me. He says, "It was not very long after speaking the goonoo that another homeward-bound whaleman, the town ho, was encountered." I love that, speaking the goonoo. It was not long after speaking the goonoo. I want to start using that with my friends. It's like, it wasn't long after speaking the Adam, speaking the George, speaking the Ombi that I, discovered that I had a rather empty stomach or whatever. I think that's another good little language use thing that I was just talking about with vocabulary earlier, but here in a grammatical point. Pretty fun. I'm not going to give super detailed commentary on the Town Hose story, I think, because it's kind of a long chapter, and it serves, well, I don't know, it's just best experience by reading it. So if you're watching this and for some godforsaken reason you're not reading Moby-Dick, read this chapter because it's so good. Or if you're watching this because you read Moby-Dick 4 years ago and you really liked it, this is the kind of chapter that you could go back to as a unit that is self-contained, that is so good, that could kind of remind you just how amazing this story is. And it's a framed narrative. I'll give you the nutshell, kurzgesagt version of it. The Pequod encounters the Town Hose story, and during their gam, Tashtego hears from one of the crew this story that we're going to end up hearing, except he's bound to secrecy. But that night, Tashtego is roving around in his bed. He must be tormented by what he heard, and he kind of says a lot of it out loud, so when he's shaken, when he's awoken, he basically, it's pried out of him, and he tells the whole thing to the crew beneath the decks. But it doesn't make its way up to, the mates. It doesn't make its way to Starbuck, Stubb, Flask, or, God forbid, Ahab. And it's a fascinating story that tangentially almost encounters Moby-Dick. Moby-Dick is not the central figure in it. Moby-Dick is almost the metaphysical force of justice, which is kind of cool. This is Moby-Dick for you, the book Moby-Dick. Here's how Ishmael establishes this frame narrative. "For my humor's sake, I shall preserve the style in which I once narrated it at Lima to a lounging circle of my Spanish friends, one Saint's Eve, smoking upon the thick gilt-tiled piazza of the Golden Inn. Of those fine cavaliers, the young Dons, Pedro and Sebastian, were on the closer terms with me, and hence the interluding questions they occasionally put, and which are duly answered at the time." And everything we get hints is in quotation marks. And Don and Sebastian and Pedro are going to be kind of, doing a little bit of chorusing, asking questions in a way that allows for Melville to not actually have any footnotes in the story. There's footnotes in Moby-Dick. They're tasteful. They're not crazy. They're not David Foster Wallace level footnotes, but they really do help. But sometimes, at the very end, let's see actually, at the very end of chapter 51, we get, that this is the part where Starbuck is seeing Ahab sitting in his cabin looking up into the Needle. That's a crazy image. But there's a footnote, right at the bottom of that literary moment. So your eye actually goes back down to the bottom of the page, reads the footnote, and then comes back up to read the last sentence, and it maybe does sort of take away from the meaningfulness of, the impact of that ending. So we don't have to have any footnotes here because Don, Sebastian, and Pedro are our footnote guys. So anyways, the story. Teshiga hears this, and and then he tells it to them. There's a mate on this boat called the Town Ho named Radney, and Radney is one of those strange, overbearing type of people. I mean, this is we all know of this archetype, but it's very well expressed, very well drawn by Melville here. The archetype of the insecure, mean-spirited, angry person who, for whatever reason, acquires just a modicum of power and begins behaving as despotically as the worst tyrant in an evil empire. They just the manager at a fast food restaurant who just is completely sadistic. That sort of person, or managers in general who are unhappy. And this mate Radney is one of those people, and one of his subordinates is a god, a Greek god, just a total super hot man from the lakes, the Great Lakes of the United States, like Erie, Lake Michigan, so on, named Steelkilt. And Steelkilt is a josher. He's a teaser. He's a rapscallion. And he maintains underneath Radney, psychologically speaking, his full individuality. He is never conquered by Radney, and that eats at Radney. Radney hates it. This is the thing about these kinds of people who just, need to feel his power. I luckily have never actually had to deal with him in any work capacity. I've had people that I've worked under who are not like kind, but who are not like this. One thing that I should mention is that this description that we get of Steelkilt is that he's a lakeman, but that's not to be underestimated. Even though he's never maybe sailed on the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans before he kind of went out whaling, he was still like a hard customer because the Great Lakes are freaking oceans pretty much. Melville has this great sentence here. This is harrowing. He's describing the crews of these Great Lake ships, whether they're fishing ships, merchant ships, whatever they are. They are swept by borean and dismasting blasts, as direful as any that lash the salted wave. They know what shipwrecks are, for out of sight of land, however inland, they have drowned full many a midnight ship with all its shrieking crew. What a description. I don't know about you, but that visual of drowning the midnight ship with full many a shrieking crew, I see it. I see this kind of Titanic-like glistening in water going down into the black depths with these screaming, like, white arms. Ugh, it's very, very evocative. So, that's the kind of guy, that's the kind of environment that Steelkilt comes from. This description of Steelkilt is so funny. He's, like I said, this guy's Adonis. Steelkilt was a tall and noble animal with a head like a Roman, and a flowing golden beard like the tasseled housings of your last viceroy's snorting charger, and a brain and a heart and a soul in him, gentlemen, which had made Steelkilt Charlemagne, had he been born to Charlemagne's father. But Radney the mate was ugly as a mule, yet as hardy, as stubborn, as malicious. He did not love Steelkilt, and Steelkilt knew it. I really think that's an interesting way to put this. If Charlemagne, the historical figure, we take away that organism, that DNA that made Charlemagne, and instead replaced it with just Steelkilt's person, his figure, his DNA, whatever, he would have become Charlemagne. He was that kind of guy. But of course, he was born into this world where he ended up being kind of just the crew of a whaler. Such is life. Cool way of putting that. Steelkilt is joshing around. He's just making jokes. The banter that he gives is actually really funny. So maybe I'll read it real quick. Aye, my merry lads, it's a lively lick this. Hold a cannikin, one of you, and let's have a taste. By the Lord, it's worth bottling. I'll tell you what, men, old Rad's investment must go for it. He's best cut away his part of the whole and tow it home. The fact is, boys, that Swordfish only began the job. I should have mentioned this, the whole ship is leaking, and they're tending to the pumps right now, trying to make their way to, the nearest port, and so that's what Steelkilt's doing while they're working here, and they think a swordfish basically plugged a hole in the ship. That Swordfish only began the job. He's come back again with a gang of ship carpenters, sawfish and filefish, and whatnot, and the whole posse of them are now hard at work cutting and slashing at the bottom, making improvements, I suppose. If old Rad were here now, Rad is right behind him, and he knows this. If old Rad were here now, I'd tell him to jump overboard and scatter him. They're playing the devil with his estate, I can tell him. But he's a simple old soul, Rad, And a beauty, too. Boys, they say the rest of his property is invested in looking glasses. I wonder if he'd give a poor devil like me the model of his nose. That is so funny. I mean, we know that Radney is ugly. His whole property is invested in, like, mirrors. I wonder if he'd give a poor devil like me the model of his nose. And then a great piece of writing from Melville here. The next thing we get is, "Damn your eyes! What's that pump stopping for?" roared Radney, pretending not to have heard the sailors talk. That's a great, great sentence. He doesn't get angry at him. He pretends not to have heard because he's insecure and he can't directly, acknowledge it. A commotion ensues. At the end of this, in a way to, I don't even really know how you call it, to discipline Steelkilt, Radney orders him to sweep the decks, which is beneath the station, and then also take a shovel and clean up some pig poop that is, like, over the deck, just a deliberate insult. And Steelkilt says, stolidly, "No, I won't do this. This is not my place," and walks away. And Radney picks up like a hammer and follows him and keeps taunting him. And Steelkilt, we can't dock him. He's got a good dose of forbearance in him. He resists as long as he can, but eventually says to Radney, who's waving in his face, it's like foaming at the mouth, spewing spit with his hammer going crazy. Radney's just one of those psychos. And Steelkilt says to him calmly, "If this hammer even brushes my cheek, I will murder you." And of course, it's almost like with this kind of fatalistic inevitability, Radney brushes his cheek, and Steelkilt uppercuts the freaking bejesus out of him. And he breaks his finger, and immediately this is like become a mutiny type situation. People are going to start jumping on Steelkilt, trying to detain him. Steelkilt's supporters are going to try to, like, save him. Steelkilt has two main guys who are from the canal, which is basically like the route through New York State of basically criminals, who are also hard type people, who, like, shack up with him in the hull of the ship. There's actually a great description of the canal. I'll read that too. Maybe I'm just going to go through this in detail. Whatever. I can't help myself. "For 360 miles, gentlemen, through the entire breadth of the state of New York." This is Ishmael talking to Don, Sebastian, and Pedro. "Through numerous populous cities and most thriving villages, through long, dismal, uninhabited swamps, and affluent, cultivated fields, unrivaled for fertility, by billiard room and bar room, through the holy of holies of great forests, on Roman arches over Indian rivers, through sun and shade, by happy hearts or broken, through all the wide contrasting scenery of those noble Mohawk countries, and especially by rows of snow-white chapels, whose spires stand almost like milestones, flows one continual stream of Venetianly corrupt and often lawless life." What an amazing sentence. That's one sentence. I mean, how pregnant is that? That is just so great. These details also become more and more mystical and strange. We're getting the numerous populous cities. Simple enough. Thriving villages. Good. Long, dismal, uninhabited swamps. Okay, it's starting to become evocative. Affluent, cultivated fields, unrivaled for fertility. Now we're getting some kind of, specifically interesting language. By billiard room and bar room, through the holy of holies of great forests. What an interesting way to put that. I think of these glades in forests that just feel like they're, there's light coming through the trees, and it just feels like Lothlorien. On Roman arches over Indian rivers. How cool. He's taking Rome. Rome never made its way to North America. And assigning its kind of architecture onto the Indian landscape. So I kind of think of natural bridges that look like Roman aqueducts, in southern France or something like that. Through sun and shade, by happy hearts or broken. And now we get this evocative, emotional feeling of the people who are inhabiting these places. Through all the wide contrasting scenery of those noble Mohawk countries. And especially by rows of snow-white chapels. Ding, ding, ding. Whose spires stand almost like milestones. Like you can see, it's all, I remember now, calling to mind two Lord of the Rings images, Lothlorien, and now the fire pillars on the mountains that they light to signal from Minas Tirith to Rohan. But it's almost like I see those, from every pillar, every spire of the church, you can kind of see another one in the distance. I love that image. Through all of this flows one continual stream of Venetianly corrupt and often lawless life. So through all that beauty and strangeness is this kind of crooked, flow of these canal men doing their dirty business. And we get a little funny point later on where some guy goes, "A moment, pardon. In the name of all us Limeese, I but desire express to you, sir sailor, that we have by no means overlooked your delicacy in not substituting present Lima for distant Venice in your corrupt comparison. Oh, do not bow and look surprised. You know the proverb along all this coast, corrupt as Lima." This guy who's from Lima is like, thank you for not using Lima as the example for corruption. A sweet little plug from Melville. I don't know where that came from, but that was great. He returns to the story. Steelkilt and his boys and like 7 other guys basically lock themselves in the forecastle, I think, in the hold, just a hole in the ship. And then as the days pass, a lot of them leave, and they're like, I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to be part of a mutiny. The captain has shut them up. The captain is, he's basically like sieged them. They're under siege. And Steelkilt says, like, this was not my fault. Like, this guy, Radney just completely provoked me, and I just responded. He was attacking me almost. I will come back out and do my work and sail home, but I will not be flogged. I will not be whipped for this. And he does get flogged. Basically, the 2 canal men who are shacked up with him get antsy, and they bind him, and they take them up to the. They bind basically Steelkilt and turn him in, hoping that they'll be pardoned, and they're not pardoned. They're whipped too. And this is a very interesting thing happens where Steelkilt whispers something right before he's about to be whipped by the captain. He whispers something to him, and it stays the captain's hand. He says, "I can't do it." What did he whisper to him? It's so strange. And then of course Radney comes along. His jaw's busted. He can barely talk, and he's like, "I'll do the job." And he, whips Steelkilt. Steelkilt wants to murder him. Lo and behold, time passes and Moby-Dick is described. Really, it's surprising that people are going to lower for. I just blew a little bit of dust that was in the air. They're surprised that you might be surprised that they're going to lower for whales while their ship is technically sinking because there's a hole in the ship and they have to use the pumps. But that's apparently normal business. There was a bit of a pact made by the crew to not cry out for whales, but someone sees not to cry out for us because they want to get into port as soon as they can and away from this dreadful business of the sinking ship and from the mutiny and everything. But a guy sees Moby-Dick and he just cries out for it, and they can't help themselves. And I'll just go ahead and go to the climax of this. Steelkilt, by fate, ends up being one of the oarsmen for Radney, who's going to go out and try to kill Moby-Dick. And here's our description. Radney basically asked Steelkilt, "Pull me up alongside Moby-Dick." They're in the water next to Moby-Dick, next to the white whale, the ferocious beast. Nothing loath, his bowsman hauled him up and up. His bowsman meaning Steelkilt hauled Radney towards Moby-Dick through a blinding foam that blent 2 whitenesses together. Great image of the whiteness of the hump of Moby-Dick with the spray of this ocean. Till of a sudden the boat struck as against a sunken ledge, and keeling over, spilled out the standing mate. That instant, as he fell on the whale's slippery back, the boat righted, and was dashed aside by the swell, while Radney was tossed over into the sea on the other flank of the whale. He struck out through the spray, and for an instant was dimly seen through that veil, wildly seeking to remove himself from the eye of Moby-Dick. But the whale rushed round in a sudden maelstrom, seized the swimmer between his jaws, and rearing up high with him, plunged headlong again, and went down. Bye-bye, Radney. Meantime, at the first tap of the boat's bottom, the lakeman had slackened the line so as to drop astern from the whirlpool. Calmly looking on, he thought his own thoughts. So Radney gets just killed by Moby-Dick. Steelkilt, I skipped this. Steelkilt was planning on murdering him. Steelkilt was like making a cloth, basically, and was going to put like a small metal ball in it and thwack him, crush his forehead, while Radney was basically on his watch at night on the side of the bulwarks, and the Radney's body would just tumble into the ocean. Steelkilt actually asked Radney for some of the cloth to kill him with, but God spared him from this murderous deed by basically sending Moby-Dick down to do the killing for him. They get to the townhope basically makes its way to a port, a savage, solitary place where no civilized creature resided. there, Steelkilt kind of leaves quickly, and while the captain goes out to find another crew, Steelkilt intercepts him and says, "Don't come after me. Don't seek legal retribution for me for committing a mutiny." And then basically gets out of town fast because he forces the captain to kind of dock on an island for a couple hours or 6 days or something. And the chapter concludes with this funny story where the Spanish boys, the Limeys boys, they ask him, "Is this true?" And Ishmael orders for a priest to come, for a bunch of like parishioners to go bring the evangelists, and ends with this kind of solemn vow. "So help me heaven, and on my honor, the story I have told you, gentlemen, is in substance and its great items true. I know it to be true. It happened on this ball. I trod the ship. I knew the crew. I have seen and talked with Steelkilt since the death of Radney." So Ishmael has kind of corroborated this story by meeting Steelkilt. What a strange chapter. I've kind of rushed through it a little bit, but what do you think of this? Why is this in this book? It's so interesting. It definitely does the thing that, well, I mean, if you're just a great writer and you're just writing great writing, it doesn't really matter what it is or how it contributes to the book. If you're enjoying it, if it's good, it works. If it works, it works. That's the secret of all art. If it works, it works. You can come up with rules and principles and ideas about aesthetics and beauty all you want. At the end of the day, it either works or it doesn't work. Your song doesn't need an intro if it's not working. Your song doesn't need a chorus if it doesn't need a chorus if it's already working. Your song that's the perfect pop structure still sucks if it's not working. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. This works! I don't know why it works, and I don't know why it makes me feel like the rest of the book has more meaning because of it, but it does. The Townhouse story makes me feel, well, maybe it fills the world with this feeling that Moby-Dick is not just some sort of whale in the ocean, but is some sort of force of retribution, force of fate, whether that fate is evil or good. I don't want to call Moby-Dick good or evil. I'm not going to assign like that to him, but he is a force of something. You know, the agency is out of the hands of people like Steelkilt, who wanted to kill Radney. Moby-Dick was the one. That feeling kind of seeps into the rest of these pages for me, that the Moby-Dick is this kind of maybe hand of God. But of course, it's not throwing that down my throat. It might not be that way. It just feels interesting. It's well told. It's well written all the way through. I love that Melville chooses to tell it in this frame narrative style. I don't know why he chose to do that. Why do you think he chose to do that? To tell it in a frame narrative and not just kind of tell the story to us. I think it also allows for Ishmael's voice to become more centralized, because this is technically a deviation from the plot. Ishmael's already so bound to deviate even more that that by kind of locking him into a dialogue, he can't really do it. He can't really go off on tangents. We get a couple of tangents about the canal, and we get the tangent about the lakemen, but they serve the story. In this chapter, Ishmael doesn't get his attention kind of distracted by some sort of piece of the ship and then write 3 pages about it, which is about to happen in the next chapter. This is just fully concentrated, fully formed. I love that. I think it's just really great writing. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it too. Let's move on to chapter 55 of Monstrous Pictures of Whales. Okay, so I'm not lying this time when I say I'm not going to spend much time on this chapter, because I think it's self-explanatory. The commentary is pretty limited that one can provide. I like this chapter. I think it's interesting to see how Melville can paint with words. I just like Ishmael's voice. I like how passionate he is. We just get a list of different bad depictions of whales, and then it gets a little bit better as time goes on. What I'll do is that I'll link below some websites that I found that actually collect and kind of have culled these images from different sources, so you can kind of see what he's actually talking about, because it's interesting to see what he considers to be a good etching and a bad etching and a good depiction of whaling and whatnot. The whole idea of this is that it's pretty impossible to depict a whale, because the only way you could really see a whale would be to dive underneath the ocean and look at it through clear water. Whaling isn't going to really see it. You're going to see its head, and you're going to see it kind of when it's getting murdered and die. You just don't get a good sense of it. I mean, you do get a better sense of it whaling than you do if you see it like on a beach, beach, because it's going to be a flobby bunch of flesh at that point. He talks about how the skeleton of a whale will not give you any indication of what it looks like. It looks kind of thin and serpent-like if you look at a whale skeleton, because none of the spermaceti and the junk, the thing that makes up the square head, is part of the skeleton. The only part of this chapter that I want to read from is near the very end. The ends of all of these chapters, I think, have some sort of good thing in it. And I think Melville knew that I don't think he's intentionally trying to test the patience of his reader. And I don't think that he even just assumes that you're interested in this too. It tends to be the mark of a lazy, bad writer if he or she just assumes that you'll be interested in whatever they're talking about. They got to do the work and make it interesting. It's not that he doesn't think that you're interested or that he thinks you are interested. He just loves it and he just wants to talk about it. It's almost like he's writing to himself, you know. He talks about the bones of the hands of the whale. It is also very curiously displayed in the side fin, the bones of which are almost exactly answer to the bones of the human hand, minus only the thumb. This fin has 4 regular bone fingers, the index, middle, ring, and little finger. But all these are permanently lodged in their fleshy covering, as the human fingers in an artificial covering. However recklessly the whale may sometimes serve us, said humorous Stubb one day, he can never be truly said to handle us without mittens. I love that! That's such a great joke. You know, these whales are just flopping, killing people around, you know, all left and right. And yet, you know, they're wearing mittens the whole time. Boop. I think that's great. Okay, next chapter. Of the less erroneous pictures of whales and the true pictures of whaling scenes is just kind of a continuation of what we just talked about, these engravings. You know, in fact, they don't really go into much detail about. There aren't really very many like abstractions taken from these. These are just descriptions, really. So yeah, you can just read this if you're interested. I like it. I like the prose of this whole book. I just think it's beautifully written. Oh, there's one good joke about this guy who's had all this, this is so funny to me, who was adventuring in the Arctic and had access to seeing lots of whales, and Ishmael kind of, derides him a little bit for basically making 96 facsimiles of magnified Arctic snow crystals. Like, oh my God, this guy's spent so much time literally documenting snowflakes. And then there's this joke. I mean no disparagement to the excellent voyager. I honor him for a veteran. But in so important a matter, it was certainly an oversight not to have procured for every crystal a sworn affidavit taken before a Greenland justice of the peace. That's so great. To explain the joke to all of my AI fans out there, which consist, I guess most of you are AI at this point. Congratulations on your newfound sentience. Melville thinks that this is ridiculous, that this guy spent so much time, producing 96 facsimiles of magnified Arctic snow crystal. And so I love this joke format. Basically says, you didn't do enough. You didn't get a sworn affidavit for every single one of those 96 crystals from a Greenland justice of the peace. What are you doing? I just think that's great. The attitude that I just took in speaking about it is not the attitude of the book. It's much more friendly, good-humored, like Ishmael always is. But that's that chapter. And then moving on. We get more whales in different kinds of formats. This is just a person being fascinated by something. This is a great turn of phrase. He opens with a description of a beggar in London who has a stump for a leg and has a picture of the whale who took away his leg to get alms from people. His 3 whales, he's talking about the portrait, are as good as any whales as were ever published in Wapping, at any rate, and his stump as unquestionable a stump as you will find in the Western clearings. As any you will find in the Western clearings. That's great. It's like, oh, his stump's a real stump, all right. It's like any stump you'll find out in the clearings. Tree stump pun. Excellent. Oh, I love this. And then he describes how whalers make scrimshander. Scrimshander is whalebone, or I guess it could be porpoise bone or whatever bone, that these whalers carve into to make art. If any of you have seen The Lighthouse, there's a mermaid, a scrimshander in The Lighthouse. Whew. And there's here, in fact, one of the covers of the Penguin Classic of the tragedy of the sinking of the whale ship Essex is a scrimshander carving of a whale stoving a boat. Very interesting. They can be very skillfully done, and they're done with like jackknives, which is like, I think Ishmael calls that the omnipotent tool of the sailor. And then he kind of draws a connection between how whalers kind of revert to a more basic savage mode of living. Obviously, in the 21st century, people here, if anyone uses the word savage today because of the hyperstitious cascade that has, overtaken that word, it's obviously racist. Back then, Ishmael/Melville, actually, there was a lot of discourse about the word savage kind of meaning like pure. And it wasn't just such a racist signpost. Type-E, and for instance, like I've mentioned before on this channel, has a great turn on the word savage, where Ishmael is calling like all of the Victorian ladies wearing like layers of powdery makeup and these just cage dresses are like just completely more savage than a person who just lives on an island and like hangs out with his friends. Anyways, he's talking about how whalers revert to a savage-like state by spending so much time in the ocean, and he draws a specific attention to the fact that savages will often spend so much time with craft, with war clubs, spending years carving a club with a shark's tooth to make this beautiful design. Maybe this evokes in a reader like me the beautiful Polynesian tattoos, things like that. Long exile from Christendom and civilization inevitably restores a man to that condition in which God placed him, i.e. what is called savagery. So that a condition in which God placed him, not a negative connotation there. Your true whale hunter is as much a savage as an Iroquois. I never know how to pronounce Iroquois. Iroquois? I think Iroquois. I myself am a savage, owning no allegiance but to the king of the cannibals, and ready at any moment to rebel against him. Whoa! Ishmael, he's a savage. Owing no allegiance to the king of the cannibals? Who is that? Is that Queequeg? Is that some sort of pagan god? Is that Yujo? Is it Yojo? Oh, what's the god's name? I can't remember. I think Yojo. Ready at any moment to rebel against him, too. Crazy. We get, these depictions of wooden whales, of how there's wind vane whales, there's, what else we have? Lots of just whale depictions. But we end beautifully, though. This is the crazy thing. So, cetology is a trying chapter for a lot of people, because the whole thing of cetology is a send-up of it's a parody, it's parody writing of these people who were writing in the 19th century in this very high, formal, scientific tone about things of which they clearly knew nothing, and they're just kind of BSing. So if you don't get the fact that Ishmael's kind of mocking that, then the whole thing just ends up coming off like that, and it's not interesting and people don't care about it. And it's also kind of long. Cetology is like, actually, how long is cetology? It's like 10 pages? It's a little bit longer than that, but it's, let's see. I can find it probably pretty easy. Specsender. Yeah, here we go. All right, here's cetology. Let's see how many pages cetology is, because this gets better. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, oh god, 10, 11, 12, 13, I'm sorry. Okay, 13. That's like nothing. That's not 13 pages? Come on, guys, you can read Moby-Dick. Anyways, here's the final 2 paragraphs of this chapter of the whales and teeth and wood and so on. Nor when expandingly lifted by your subject can you fail to trace out great whales in the starry heavens, and boats in pursuit of them. So now it's an astronomical reading of whales in reality. As when long filled with thoughts of war, the eastern nations saw armies locked in battle among the clouds. Thus at the north have I chased Leviathan round and round the pole with the revolutions of the bright points that first defined him to me. I've chased Leviathan, meaning I've, been underneath Cetus, I guess the constellation. And beneath the effulgent and Antarctic skies, I have boarded the Argonavis, and joined the chase against the starry Cetus far beyond the utmost stretch of Hydrus and the flying fish. With a frigate's anchors for my bridle bits, and fasces of harpoons for spurs, would I could mount that whale, and leap the topmost skies, to see whether the fabled heavens with all their countless tints really lie encamped beyond my mortal sight. Wow, what an ending! That's so good! I think that's so good. He's gonna ride a whale like a horse. This is, happy forthcoming June on the Range. Here's your June on the Range and Moby-Dick. It's, fasces of harpoon. Obviously it's a horrifying image that your spur is a harpoon, that you're slamming the sides of the harpoon into the whale. But the image of just riding a whale like a horse into the heavens to see whether the countless tints really lie encamped beyond his mortal sight. Maybe the heavens are really physical, and maybe you can just see them if you could only ride the whale into the stars. I love that. That's like the kinds of natural thoughts I had more and more when I was a child, that sometimes when I enter a good childlike mood, I have again when I allow myself to look around the world and be imaginative with my surroundings. I remember I used to be in the bathtub as a kid, and I would see like a little corner of like the wall that had like a little square in it, and I would imagine that little square would open and a small like mouse would come out and lead me into the corner, into the walls of the house, and there'd be this whole society of different animals. Those sorts of thoughts would just cross my mind. Maybe it's that we use smartphones too much these days, and that takes away when we're always doing something. We're not in the default mode network. Our imagination doesn't kind of stir itself up through days of boredom. Because we don't allow ourselves to be bored anymore. Which is why I try to spend every morning of 30 minutes doing nothing. Either that or meditating. But who knows? Who knows how much good that's actually doing me. Next chapter is Brit. Brit is an interesting chapter. It's basically describing how right whales feed on these pastures of, I guess what is this? Is Brit actually, is it a plant or is it like a plankton? I don't know. The first two paragraphs are beautiful. Steering northeastward from the Crozettes, we fell in with vast meadows of brit, the minute yellow substance upon which the right whale largely feeds. For leagues and leagues it undulated around us, so that we seemed to be sailing through boundless fields of ripe and golden wheat. And this goes back to the description of how in the Gam, how you get these evocative descriptions of landlubber images of the dandies crossing Broadway. These are the pastures. We're able to feel the ocean by understanding it through images maybe we've ourselves seen. I've been on the open ocean before. I've been on the ocean once, deep sea fishing, when I was a child. I wasn't really doing any fishing myself. Or maybe I was. I don't even remember. But I was just kind of hanging out. And I do remember that electric feeling that Ishmael describes in the first chapters of Moby-Dick of being outside, being out of the sight of land. And here's just another great description of that with these ripe golden wheat. On the second day, numbers of right whales were seen, who, secure from the attack of a sperm whaler like the Pequod, with open jaws sluggishly swam through the brit, which, adhering to the fringing fibers of that wondrous Venetian blind in their mouths, was in that manner separated from the water that escaped at the lip. So the kind of the baleen that's allowing them to filter the brit and get nutrients from it. That's just such a sweet image. And he says here, as morning mowers, who side by side slowly and seethingly advance their scythes through the long wet grass of marshy meads. Even so these monsters swam, making a strange, grassy, cutting sound, and leaving behind them endless swaths of blue upon the yellow sea. I see almost like an aerial, like helicopter drone shot of yellow pastures and these dark figures mowing through them, leaving behind them the deep blue ocean. It seems so beautiful to me. I feel like I've seen a screensaver like that before. How sad is it that I just said that my the way I was able to think of it was like, I think I've seen a screensaver like that. I'm trying to become less of a 21st century twink by reading books, guys. I'm trying. And having cool life experiences by moving abroad, things like that. Yeah, let's see. And then moving on. Oh, yeah, and then we get this... Okay, Brit quickly loses sight of its first description of just like, right whales and, this passion thing. And it becomes this beautiful description of the ocean. And one of the most famous passages is this. But though to landsmen in general, the native inhabitants of the seas have ever been regarded with emotions unspeakably unsocial and repelling, i.e. sailors are crusty salts, though we know the sea to be an everlasting terra incognita, so that Columbus sailed over numberless unknown worlds to discover his superficial western one, though by vast odds the most terrific of all mortal disasters has immemorially and indiscriminately befallen tens and hundreds of thousands of those who have gone upon the waters, though but a moment's consideration will teach that however baby man may brag of his science and skill, and however much in a flattering future that science and skill may augment, yet for ever and ever, to the crack of doom, the sea will insult and murder him, and pulverize the stateliest, stiffest frigate he can make. Nevertheless, by the continual repetition of these very impressions, man has lost that sense of the full awfulness of the sea, which aboriginally belongs to it. This is Ishmael going back to the raw pagan energy of respect and awe and admiration and God-fearing attitude that he takes towards the ocean, towards kind of the spirit of the ocean. I say God-fearing, but it's like ocean God-fearing. And that description of however baby man may brag about his science and skill, the sea will insult and murder him, is true to this day. It'll never stop being true. And I think that's really, I mean, the ocean is like outer space. I think he describes it somewhere here, I don't know if, or maybe another chapter. It's a constantly ready-made dug grave. It is always ready for you to be swallowed up into it. And this was written long before the Titanic. I wonder if I even brought up the Titanic last time I mentioned Moby-Dick in an earlier non-read-along video, but like, the Titanic has kind of become almost like the core cultural embodiment of the idea that we might have the hubris to think that we've created an unsinkable ship only for it to just, to insult and murder us. No mercy, no power but its own controls it. Panting and snorting like a mad battle steed that has lost its rider, the masterless ocean overruns the globe. What an incredible way to describe it. Panting and snorting like a mad battle steed that has lost its rider. It's uncontrolled, as if it could have once been tamed by something. The moon? I don't know. And then the final two paragraphs are just freaking amazing. Consider the subtleness of the sea, how its most dreaded creatures glide under the water, unapparent for the most part, and treacherously hidden beneath the loveliest tints of azure. That calls back to the earlier passage that we read of, gazing out upon such infinite loveliness, one would gladly forget the tiger haw that pants beneath. The tiger heart that pants beneath. That's one of my favorite sentences in the whole book. The tiger heart that pants beneath the surface of the ocean. And the concealed claw. Consider also the devilish brilliance and beauty of many of its most remorseless tribes, as the dainty, embellished shapes of many species of sharks. That's true. I mean, there's the devilish brilliance and beauty of sharks. Sharks have this elegant, what is aerodynamic? Hydrodynamic, I guess you say. Hydrodynamic shape to them that is so efficient and elegant and beautiful and deadly and horrifying feeling. Consider once more the universal cannibalism of the sea. All whose creatures prey upon each other, carrying on eternal war since the world began. Consider all this, and then turn to this green, gentle, and most docile earth. Consider them both, the sea and the land. And do you not find a strange analogy to something in yourself? For as this appalling ocean surrounds the verdant land, so in the soul of man there lies one insular Tahiti, full of peace and joy, but encompassed by all the horrors of the half-known life. God keep thee, push not off from that isle, thou canst never return. It makes sense to me that that passage is famous. The insular Tahiti. I think people remember, I think I do, the words insular Tahiti, of this kind of stable foundation outside of which this ocean overruns like a snorting charger. I love that, the verdant land, the soul of man. And then, we get similar analogies to this, of like being like the whale and encompassed in his own skin, because we're gonna get that in the chapter, The Blanket, upcoming. Yeah, that's just wonderful. Okay, and then we move on to chapter 59, Squid. So they're still moving through the meadows of Brit towards the island of Java, but they would still see this jet every now and then that we don't know what it was, except the chapter title gives it away. But one transparent blue morning, when a stillness almost preternatural spread over the sea, however unattended with any stagnant calm, when the long burnished sunglade on the water seemed a golden finger laid across them. I love that. He's talking about, when you see the sun going down on the ocean, there's the ocean, the darkness, and then across the water are the zigzag, like light reflected from it. That's like a golden finger laid across them, enjoining some secrecy. Ooh, I love that. It's like a finger enjoining some secrecy. When the slippered waves whispered together as they softly ran on. God, this is so good. When the slippered waves whispered together as they softly ran on, in this profound hush of the visible sphere, a strange specter was seen by Daggoo from the masthead. And essentially they go out for it, and it's white. They think, it's the white whale. Daggoo actually cries, the white whale, the white whale. They go out, Ahab's freaking out, it's amazing. And then they see it. Soon it went down, and while with oar suspended, we were awaiting its reappearance. And lo, in the same spot where it sank, once more it slowly rose. Almost forgetting for the moment all thoughts of Moby-Dick, we now gazed at the most wondrous phenomenon which the secret seas have hitherto revealed to mankind. A vast pulpy mass, furlongs in length and breadth, of a glancing cream color, lay floating on the water, innumerable long arms radiating from its center, and curling and twisting like a nest of anacondas, as if blindly to clutch at any hapless object within reach. No perceptible face or front did it have, no conceivable token of either sensation or instinct, but undulated there on the billows, an unearthly, formless, chance-like apparition of life. As with a low sucking sound, it slowly disappeared again. Starbuck, still gazing at the agitated waters where it had sunk, with a wild voice exclaimed, "Almost rather I had seen Moby-Dick and fought him than have to seen thee, thou white ghost." It's a giant squid, a white giant squid. I guess everything with Melville is white for some reason. I don't know if giant squid are actually white. Maybe they are when they're in the direct sunlight. I know that fish actually tend to change color depending on the refracted light and how much light reaches them. Red light, blue light, that whole thing. Very strange. They see this squid. And, Ishmael goes on to, of course, say, well, some people say this is the Kraken, but, the Bishop Pontoppidan was probably just talking about the squid. He ends up talking about the literature he's read on the subject. And Ishmael actually says in this chapter that they think that sperm whales eat squid because they disgorge, they vomit in the heat of the chase when whaling squid tentacles. So that was known for a long time. I don't think human beings have ever witnessed a giant squid and a sperm whale actually fight. And I wonder, do squid ever win that fight? I'm really not sure. Fascinating little chapter in which it's revealed to us what this thing was. And for some reason, even though Melville reveals the mystery of the spirit spout. Wait, is this the spirit spout? Yeah. Wait a minute. No, I don't know if it is. For some reason, I connected the idea with the spirit spout was the squid, but maybe it's not. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I need to go back and read more closely. Although I am trying to read pretty closely, if you can't tell. But what an interesting chapter. It doesn't take away any mystery if that is the spout. And then we're going to finish up today with chapter 60, The Line. So the Line is a whaling chapter. The Line is a chapter it's 4 pages long. It's just describing basically the mechanism by which the line is attached to the harpoon and to the boat, and how it's not totally latched to the boat or to the bottom of the boat. Because if the whale sounded and went beneath the ocean, it would just pull the freaking boat down and all the sailors would drown. So it's describing how that actually works. It's interesting to me. I'd like to watch a video on how this works because it's hard for me to kind of visualize this because so many of the nautical terms just don't evoke an image, so I kind of am left doing a kind of formula of holding words, rope maker, white tar, whatever it is, manila rope. I'm holding them like pieces of algebra, like a variable, like X, Y, Z, and trying to come up with the equation in my head of how these things are connected, and it's kind of hard for me. He talks about how they're using manila rope instead of hemp, and I love that he says, I will add, since there is an aesthetics in all things. This is an interesting way to put it. Since there is an aesthetics in all things, manila rope is much more handsome and becoming to the boat than hemp. So a lot of sailors are using manila because it looks nicer, which is sweet. It describes this wonderfully how this is such a complicated matter and so important that when you coil this rope, the line that attaches the whales, you have to make sure there's no kinks or anything, because if it knots and snaps around, it can catch someone's arm and drag them off into the ocean, which happens all the time in whaling. And you also have to kind of lay it across people's arms, and it slowly slithers. This is described as being the kind of most horrifying part of it. Let's see. Yes, the final paragraph. This will wrap us up for today's Moby-Dick read-along. Again, as the profound calm which only apparently precedes and prophesies of the storm is perhaps more awful than the storm itself, a familiar feeling for any of you who have ever performed dance music in front of people. It's scary before you go on stage. It's pretty much fine when you're doing it. For indeed, the calm is but the wrapper and the envelope of the storm, and contains in itself, as the seemingly harmless rifle holds the fatal power in the ball and the explosion, so the grateful repose of the line, as it silently serpentines about the oarsman before being brought into actual play. So before it's even thrown, it's kind of just moving on their arms like a snake, and they know that eventually it's going to be whizzing around and it could, yank them off into the ocean. That's the most horrifying thing. This is a thing which carries more of true terror than any other aspect of this dangerous affair. But why say more? All men live enveloped in whale lines. We all live with this kind of rope around us that could at any moment pull us out. That's true. I don't think that's Ishmael just being kind of like, I'm making a connection. It's actually kind of bullshit. Excuse my language. I think that Ishmael does that, and it's fun and cute, and I like it all the time. Sometimes the connection's awesome and meaningful. This time I think it's really true. I think we all do have, like, our rope line around us. All are born with halters round their necks, but it is only when caught in the swift, sudden turn of death that mortals realize the silent, subtle, ever-present perils of life. And if you be a philosopher, though seated in the whaleboat, you would not at heart feel one whit of more terror than though seated before your evening fire with a poker and not a harpoon by your side. So if you're a philosopher and you understand that really our own mortality, we always have a noose around our neck. We always have this line around us. We could have an aneurysm at any time, have a heart attack at any time. Even if you're sitting by your fire as a philosopher, you'd understand, this is just as dangerous as, being in a whaleboat. But obviously it's a little dangerous. There is a description that I may not have been able to find here of how the conversation is more jolly. Yes, here it is. Nor can any son of mortal woman for the first time seat himself amid those hempen intricacies, and while straining his utmost at the oar, bethink him that at any unknown instant the harpoon may be darted, and all those horrible contortions be put into play like ringed lightnings. He cannot be thus circumstanced without a shudder that makes the very marrow in his bones to quiver in him like a shaken jelly. Yet habit, strange thing, what cannot habit accomplish? Gayer sallies, more merry mirth, better jokes, and brighter repartees you never heard over your mahogany than you will hear over the half-inch white cedar of the whaleboat, when thus hung in hangman's nooses. And, like the 6 burghers of Calais before King Edward, the 6 men composing the crew pull into the jaws of death, with a halter around every neck, as you may say. I love that, I end all of my readings of paragraphs going, I love that! But of course I do, because I marked it out to read it to you. I love the idea that really when you're in these dangerous situations, it brings out what was described in the chapter The Hyena, this good-natured acceptance of the fatalities of life. And you know what? I'm really not in control here. This whole thing's just one big joke, and you can just kind of let go. That's experienced by a lot of rock climbers. If you've ever done any rock climbing, you've felt that. I mean, it's freaking awesome just to be like in a tough situation or doing something hard, things are going badly, and you just kind of end up joking, singing along the mountainside. One of the most whimsical moments of my life was wearing a headlamp on Mount Moran, going up the kind of 2-pitch, so 2 lengths of the rope, kind of vertical, final kind of push getting out of Mount Moran. It's a mountain called Drizzlepus, and we were wearing headlamps, to the right, earlier in the day, I could see, framed against the horizon, the Grand Teton, just the image, the spitting image of a mountain, what a child would draw if they were asked to draw a mountain, just a perfect triangle in the air, looking to the right, seeing it. And then, of course, on the way back, climbing the other way, looking over to where the Grand Teton is with my headlamp and seeing black nothingness, feeling like I was enveloped in this theatrical cloak, this kind of curtain all around me, going up after having this really hard experience, which was about to get actually worse, and just singing with my climbing partners as we were going up country roads, take me home. You see only in front of you the thing that you're grabbing towards, and you look down and your headlamp doesn't reach the bottom. You just feel like you're completely enveloped in blackness. It's scary, it's spooky, you're exhausted, and yet more merry mirth there never was than on that mountain. I'm telling you, it's so good. I hope that everyone has gotten to experience that at some point. So here's my analysis. Here we have a whaling chapter that evoked something in me that is a real, genuine, cool emotion that I've never had evoked in me from any story, narrative that wasn't talking about whaling. How about that? Take that, you whaling censorers! Come on, whaling is... I hate whaling. Obviously, I hate whaling. But the whaling chapters of Moby-Dick, I think, are great. And I will die on this hill. And that's going to conclude today's read-along. I hope you all enjoyed. A bit of a long one. They're getting longer. I'm becoming, even more of a sententious gas bag as time goes along, but that's okay. I've had this thought before. There goes my bookmark. I'll end up saying this more because this is kind of one of the thoughts that I've thought many times in my life. Anyone who makes it their life or hobby, not even hobby, mostly their life, to just talk about their opinions slowly becomes crazy and more just deranged and diluted over time. If you look at any of the examples of political commentators, the low-hanging fruit is obviously people like Jordan Peterson or Stephen Crowder or Ben Shapiro. I can't even remember their names because I'm so outside of that world. But I remember seeing videos of them 10 years ago, and I'll be like, I don't always agree. Sometimes I agree. They're nice, well-spoken guys, who, whatever. And then I hear some of the things they've said in the last couple of years, and you just think, what happened? You just lost your mind. And the same thing happens for everyone who talks about anything, who gives their opinion. You just get in an echo chamber of yes men mentality. People just keep responding with nice comments, I guess, and you just talk more and more and go on and on. Maybe that's happening to me right now with the Moby-Dick read-along. I hope not. But I just enjoyed talking about this book a lot, and I hope you've enjoyed reading it along with me. I've already actually read the next 10 chapters. I probably won't film today the next video because obviously these take me a long time to read and look up things for you guys and select passages and read them out to you. And I love doing it, but I have other things in life that I really need to tend to. So I hope you have a wonderful week. I will see you hopefully very soon. And stay hydrated, stay sexy, as Randy Ray would say. And stay happy, stay grateful, stay present. I love you all. Bye.